Hello everybody, thank you for attending my panel here. This is going to be about RPG design patterns, as evidenced back there. If you don't know what that is, that's perfectly fine. This is all based against the work from Whitson, John Whitson. He came up with the idea of using design patterns, which is it's from software design, where you have different little patterns that arise from when you, I'm sorry. It's like, okay, that doesn't matter. What matters is just know that whenever you do something repetitively, you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So that's what this is doing. A lot of RPGs use a lot of the same things. And what this is doing is that it's recognizing that and trying to give a uniform jargon and name to each of those things that we all know what they are, even though each game gives them a different name. This presentation will be for people that want to start making RPGs. We have tried before, but get overwhelmed with all the different possible options, and we have trouble making their own design choices. Now, this panel is not just about me talking about the different design patterns. That would be boring. I didn't want to do that. So what it's going to be is it's going to be an interactive session where we make a few decisions about what sort of game we want to make. Right? It is not going to be a comprehensive rule set. It's just going to be like a simple little small rule set or a skeleton for a game. And as we go through, I'm going to mark down what design patterns seem like the general group seems to be interested in as we go through it. By the end of this, we should have a good idea about what the group considers a nice design result. And as we go along, I want to keep this kind of open and loose, not too formal. So if y'all have any questions, as long as I'm done saying whatever I'm saying, feel free to voice it. At the moment, is there anything before I continue? Alright, so we're going to make an RPG today. What kind of mood do you think the game should evoke? Meaning, kind of like, do you want it to be like a light, fun, fantasy adventure game? Do you want it to be kind of like a grim, dark, kind of science fiction sort of thing? Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
Can we do both?
Yeah. Yes.
So,
as long as we have a clear design choice.
well, like something simple, or is that we could have something that's serious, but at the same time somewhat kind of comedic. Maybe like something cross between Made and some sort of regular D&D campaign.
Yeah. So you basically are saying that you'd like to have an RPG that is lighthearted and violent.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. I'm just saying that would be a concise way of saying it. Does anyone else have any other ideas or options? Everyone like violent and lighthearted about it. Okay, lighthearted violence. It is its addition.
Wait, do we have someone over there? Do you have one?
Well, I have a different take on it.
Sure.
Not necessarily plain violence of the comedy, but looking lighthearted. What was some darker stuff around the edges that you need
Looking
to catch me?
Like cartoons that are, or some, not necessarily cartoons, but
Say sort of thing that doesn't necessarily mention the realistic implications, like say the wizards left out of town. Like say if Dark Wizards left out of town, well, then you guys, this place is all empty, and who knows what magic could leak out or something like that.
okay. So what you're saying is it's a serious take on like the genre, but it's more like a
Or an adult fairy tale sort of thing?
like an adult fairy tale. Is that it, or
More or less.
if it's not, by all means let me know if it is different. I just try to make it understand what type of mood you're in. Because we're all doing this. I'm just helping you guys. I'm just guiding you through the moment.
Well, I suppose I'm not quite.
Okay. Can you give me another example, maybe?
Well, say nobody in this can die. They can kill, but can't die. Like, say somebody's dismembered by a monster or dragon. Well, they're still going on. They're still alive.
I see.
They've been shredded a little bit hammered, but they're still alive.
like we're talking about itching and scratching.
Like mirror.
So is it kind of cartoon or is it not? Is it?
No,
Kind of, no?
yes and no.
Well, I mean, like, when
Okay,
I'm saying,
basically, well, I'm trying to get around it by not blurring out some of the obvious.
by all means, if you can reference something
The Land
direct,
of Oz.
huh?
The Land of Oz.
Land of Oz.
Happy. But immortality can be kind of nasty.
It can be rather. I mean, look,
Like,
the witch's feet going like that. That always got me in the
well,
shivers.
actually, it was more about the book.
The book, okay.
Like Tin Man,
Mhm.
he got to become the Tin Man because just about everything else was chopped off
That's
or
true.
chopped off by an axe.
Okay, so it's more along the lines you're playing up the pseudo-realistic, kind of gritty fantasy.
Yeah, that's one of the I was thinking of.
I like that. Does that go along with your design goal too a little bit?
Well, I mean,
Because it could be quite violent as well.
well,
Give the humor kind of dark spin.
yeah, I mean, I was only throwing out the whole bolt thing because, you know, you got one extreme, which is the lighthearted stuff, like if you say example, something like Maid, or you have the darker stuff like, you know, an Arkham Horror or a, you know, things like that. So definitely something that's just gritty, things, like we were saying, makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, so our mood shall be I think we can come up to a decision that it should be a gritty, fantasy kind of. What was it?
You said pseudo-realistic.
Pseudo-realistic, gritty, violent, and fantasy. Okay. Let me see if I can get that on the board.
Just right, pseudo-realistic fantasy. Great.
Okay. Okay, are we designing this for a specific setting, or are we going to be making like a generalized rule set? These differentiation would be World of Darkness would be a specific setting because, and I'm assuming everyone here knows like Vampire the Masquerade and things like that. If you don't, please don't be shy. Do you know? Yeah. Okay. How many RPGs have you played? And it's fine if you haven't played any. One? Well, which one have you played? Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Great. Pathfinder, much like Dungeons and Dragons, is based off of the D20 system. That system itself is used in many different games, but it is not tied specifically to a core rulebook. In the event of Vampire the Masquerade, the rules and like the setting and everything is all combined one and the same. So, would we want to have this rule set designed specifically for this sort of mood and what setting we're going to be designing? Or should we make it more of an open rule set that can be applied to several different settings should we decide to come up with one?
I think as narrow as your mood is, you may not have a choice.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit more specific.
Setting specific.
True that?
It's kind of like the rule set for Gamma World, but not avoid in any other setting. Show them the age there.
Well, in the event of
Mutants in secret
this case,
society, you know.
what I was referring to is the mood here is for like the core rule set would be generic. This would be what would be shipping with the game, so to speak. Like Dungeons and Dragons, while using the D20 system, is using the, I believe, Greyhawk campaign setting, usually by default. So it comes with its own setting, but it's more of a suggestion. You don't have to. I mean, who runs Greyhawk in D&D? I mean, some people might. I like Greyhawk. I'm just saying most people just come up with their own systems and their own campaign settings. So that's the general idea. And also something to keep in mind is, while no one really plays the Greyhawk setting, D&D generally has a general feel to it, regardless of whoever comes up with it, because the rules limit you and also are enhanced by sticking with that general theme. So don't think that just because you have a general mood that you can't actually leave it open for other systems.
Well, the foundations are Western things, specifically medieval Western.
Very well. Then we'll keep it. Alright. By the way, I'm not trying to make you mad.
No.
Anyway, I'm trying to be
We're having a discussion.
Alright.
We're all adults here.
You're making a game in a room full of nerds.
This technical.
I mean, you probably want to start ordering things to throw in chairs. So
Yeah.
we haven't done that yet.
I like how you say yes.
Well,
Literary genres.
what happens if an angry
Well,
bird?
you've already mentioned Wizard of Oz. That's not technically, by technical definition, a literary genre, which would be like comedy, drama, things like that. Since you mentioned something, what was your name by the way, sir? With the lady lantern shirt on. Sorry? Robert. You mentioned that it was basically the land of Oz, right?
Yeah.
I know it's not specifically that, but that's something that we
But
can
that
keep
was
in
what was
mind.
through my head. That was the name was running through my head.
Yeah.
If you like happy, people can still, well, not exactly die in normal ways, but get totally dismembered and they're not characters.
Precisely. And that may not be the end, and in the case of like mechanics, that may not be the end for that character. And even the Tin Man, he may have picked in any other system or any other kind of setting, he would have been, that would have been ended. He would be no longer a.
Good.
No, stop it. Alright. But yes, because of the setting and the mood we're going for, that will not be necessarily be the end, and that could affect our design choices later on. So when we're talking about literary genres, we're looking at like we can think of the Land of Oz because that would correspond to a lot of our design goals. Would anyone else disagree, or should we make it more?
We could probably just generalize it to just like high fantasy.
Yeah.
High fantasy?
I mean, I would consider.
High fantasy, but keeping in the like you were saying earlier about.
Well, I was going to say, like, with a literary genre, I mean, to me, a Wizard of Oz seems like more of an adventure, the adventure of finding out about these new things, or, the person who's never seen any of these things before is just going out and seeing the trees with faces that can throw apples, and the witches, and all these things, just the newcomer's perspective.
Oh, and newcomers, that's an interesting take on it, because the PCs could be newcomers to this setting.
And I may be jumping ahead here.
No, it's fine.
You familiar with the term high concept?
High concept.
Yes.
I think
What you
I
do
know.
in Hollywood when you're wanting to pitch a movie.
Mhm.
Because you're talking to somebody who's got 3 seconds to listen.
Okay.
So,
Oh, that's right. It's where
So-
you give like this means this.
Right. So
Yes.
if you're selling Firefly,
Okay.
you say Western and outer space,
Okay.
and everybody understands what you're talking about.
Very well.
So here you're talking about Oz. That's grabbing some portion of
So we
it.
could say like Oz meets. What are you saying?
Slasher film.
Oz meets Skyrim sort of thing, like, anytime.
Oz meets Skyrim.
That sells me, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Traveling, adventuring, hero.
Could allow for
with
some
that sort of
steampunk aspects, because I mean,
And the occasional random weird crap.
Yeah, exactly. The occasional random Daedric prince.
I like that. I'm putting that.
Oz meets Skyrim. Or Elder Scrolls, whichever suits your fancy. I think it would be the Dragonborn Guild in that case.
Elder Scrolls, but everyone knows that. Well, that will now my Skyrim because this is the game. But yeah, it's the Elder Scrolls universe.
So, but it's the same time. It's the same thing.
It doesn't. Okay. That's what I'll say. Like, okay. So, what setting does this take place? I think we pretty much well established that already. Now, what age group would this target? This gritty kind of scary-looking game. I'm assuming it's going to be about teens and whatnot.
My 5-year-old cousin might enjoy those.
Possible, but
Your,
yeah.
your family's kind of on the odds.
I mean, if you go retro crossing, this is perfect for those kind of children.
The reason why this is actually important is because when we're designing the rules, if we were designing it for younger audiences, we want to make sure it's absorbable for them. If it's for teens plus, or if it's designed geared for teens specifically, they may want more
Well,
coverage.
and you're right about teenagers in crunch.
Then when you grow older.
This guy over here might be the oldest guy in this room, so, then there's a point in your maturity where you get to where you want
More fluff.
Yeah, you want
More
more
fluffy.
more story, you want
Exactly.
more, you know, and then it may not be age specific. Look at Warhammer 40K. You're
Yeah.
playing tabletop, but if there's a 40K player out there that doesn't care about making their own chapter and painting little colors on,
Exactly.
building the character's
Building.
background story for a tabletop.
I'm an orc player, so I make everything.
Right.
I mean,
So you know what I'm talking
I
about?
don't know if it's like, kind of along your lines, but I mean, would we want something like this to be accessible to all age groups, or do we want to have this to be like mostly older teens, like 20s to 30s specific? And I only say that because with RPGs, it's always hard to like go into an RPG like blind and learning all these rules. So I don't know if accessibility to like a broader age group than just the definitive 20-year-olds, teenagers, young children, etc., would be better, or if it would be somewhat
More broad.
just a little more broad, like not too broad between like, K and 12, but like, something.
And I
That
agree.
goal is possible. The only reason why I even mention it is that it might limit our options, and when I'm saying that helps because it keeps us focused.
No, I do understand
And
that.
the other thing is, unless you make this a little bit more comedy, you're not going to grab an older audience with pseudo-realistic fantasy Osmond Skyrim.
Yeah,
You know, like,
it's very
Dragon
niche
Age.
audience.
You need more of a Hackmaster angle where it's we're rolling in, we're getting treasure, we're leaving.
Yeah.
But potentially, the character like Raggedy Ann, she has a candy heart. What? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But because of this type of historic place, it might be feasible, and that is more kid accessible. But so you're thinking more of a broader audience?
Well, no, I was only saying broader audience and like a generalized RPG sake, but you make a good point. So maybe like just as in terms of age group, you just say young adult.
Young adults
So
plus.
like I'm starting to look at like kids from like maybe 16 on up into the 20s.
Yeah.
The age group also matters because that'll tell you the complexity of rules.
Yep.
Like you can take like a 6-year-old and say, here, roll these d6s and add up numbers, and that's how much you win by. Or you
A
can have
novice player may have similar
exact
problems as well.
But I think young adult works.
So young adult,
And,
yeah, you know.
and I'm sure you get there later, but there's also marketing to be considered. Where are you aiming?
I don't get into marketing specifically. This is more or less just trying to get your rule set out there.
Gotcha. I
And
mean,
then
you sold me at murdering a girl with a candy heart.
You ever seen the
I wanna
Raggedy
play
Ann
now.
manual, like 1970s?
Then the movie?
The movie,
Oh god.
Taffy Monster? Oh my god, that's so scary.
Yeah.
A Taffy Monster being scary. What the heck?
This is our last stage test. I saw it in the theater.
Which movie?
Return to Oz, 70 whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, with the Wheelers?
Yes,
Sand. Turn it into sand. That gave me nightmares.
I was
Okay.
in the theater for Jaws.
I think your age groups would be if they can actually understand and read pseudo-realism.
If they're old enough to read the Oz books, they're old enough to play.
That's right.
Okay.
No, if they read the Oz books, they're disturbed enough.
Alright.
So far so good.
Okay. Now I'm going to get into the jargon of the game. Gauges. This allows you to abstract concepts to interact with game systems. What? What was that? Sorry, I know a lot of this is going to sound a bit, but follow with me. Every RPG that was studied in this book uses gauges, and it can be argued that if you don't really have a role-playing game without a form of gauge, because they are graduated values with a name, and they are the groundwork of mechanical systems. Gauges gain meaning from other game entities. No gauge stands alone. Gauges are like abilities, like strength, that represent the character's abilities and being strong.
So are these static things, or can like they change?
Oh, this can change. The thing is, gauges are like the fundamental, the very building blocks of RPGs.
Now, one element is measured against another.
Exactly. And they don't gain any meaning by being alone. They gain meaning from each other. Now, currency is another term. This quantifies the meaning between intergauge relationships and are the groundwork of mechanical systems. It is the mechanical flow between gauges and usually involves adding and subtracting to and from gauges. That means that currency is the flow between gauges, right? So you have like an attribute like strength, right? And that's a term for things like strength are. It is a form of gauge. Well, the Constitution from D&D is a better choice. Constitution from D&D, or Pathfinders, if you play Pathfinder. Everyone's familiar with D&D. I tried as much to use that as possible because everyone played it. You have the Constitution score. That is the gauge for how strong your character is. Now, the currency would be the flow of the value of your Constitution score. Your score, it has a modifier like +2 or whatever. And the flow of the value from +2 to go into your hit point value would be an example of the flow of data, basically. Going from one thing to another, a gauge would be your hit points.
So it's like modifiers from gauge to gauge.
It's the road to which gauges transfer information.
Essentially, it's character customization. On a very basic level, you have to give up something.
You have to have some way for the to interact, and that currency is the means for gauges to interact.
Is the currency the points you put in it? Is the currency the points that you put in each one?
No, it sounds like something you spend, but it's not. It's honestly, I think the game that John Whitaker, I think his name was, he came up with the system. I think currency is a bit misleading of a term, but just understand that you just need to know that you have gauges which hold a value. It doesn't have to be a number. It can be like adjectives that represent, a graduated value. It can be fair, good, great. It could be 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter as long as it has a differentiation and a scale of values.
Is there a relationship between the two sets of gauges? For example, we'll go back to D&D.
Yes.
You got 3 types of saving throws, right? You got your reflex, you got your will, and you got your fortitude. Each one of those has currency that moves from constitution, wisdom, and dex. So one feeds into the other. If you go back to some older systems like villains and vigilantes, some of the stuff in fantasy games Unlimited, almost everything was a derived stat from one of 3 or 4 stats.
Exactly. And where you would add 2 gauges together, or some other
third element.
Exactly. Now, resources are a type of gauge. We're going to be getting to a lot of types of gauges because, again, almost everything's a gauge. Not everything, but most everything is. Resources are a type of gauge that are a limited quantity of game world influence that players may manage, expend, and earn. This is what you're talking about over there, that it's not something you spend. This is what you can spend. It's spent by conscious choices of players and gauges that diminish their own value, keep resources isolated from each other, and specify what resources can be spent on. But those are things you should do when you use resources.
So it's a way for players to interact with the gauges by conscious choice.
Exactly. You choose to spend things. Yes.
As I say, one of the more kind of outside the box things for this that I've seen was, I don't know if anybody else here has ever done anything with the Amber system.
I was thinking Amber throughout this.
For your character creation, there's no dice involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like your stats, they all have a baseline, and then you've got points that you can.
Yes.
And part of that is
It's
to get certain points. You actually do sealed bids,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not you win, you lose the points. And so you got to kind of, even before anything else starts, you got to okay, is this worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be the strongest? Because in the end,
And because those same points are also used for things like getting abilities, and,
It's a risk.
create a world with it.
Resources, when you design a game using resources, which you probably will be doing so, because if you implement the RPG with hit points, for example, everyone knows what hit points are, Those are technically a resource that you spend. You don't actually, this is technically not always true. For instance, hit points are a resource, but they are not spent by conscious choices. They are removed from your resource pool by receiving what's called damage. Everyone knows damages.
Well, it doesn't say it's spent by the conscious choice of the player who owns them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Now, these are the different kind of characteristics. Characteristics, and I'm going to go ahead and try to talk as if this book is authoritative, right? Because I'm basing the entire panel on this. Okay, so characteristics are basically what we can use to describe a character. This is like overarching. Characteristics would include a character's name, character's height, how strong that character is, anything that describes a character in the game. Not necessarily a player character, but any kind of character. It could also be a game event, like a rock. You may notice in some RPG they may have like a strength rating or something like that that determines how much damage it deals to you. The falling rocks, everyone, the DM has a falling rocks, everyone dies. You know, that sort of thing. Not all game entities are characters, but we call them characteristics.
So sentience doesn't necessarily mean a character.
Correct. You don't necessarily have to have that. Characteristics.
I'll go you one further. Anybody ever play the hero system?
Yes.
I do this guy. Probably about 12 years on the hero boards, people who played the games for years eventually get bored of just making up characters, so you write up stats for coffee.
Oh yeah, I love statting that.
Hero Games sold a coffee cup with its stats on the back. 1d6 hand-to-hand damage, usable once, it breaks. And life support doesn't need to drink so long as it is full.
Yeah.
People have been trying to write up the rope for years because, you know,
there's so many things.
There's so many things you can do with it. So, yeah, anything that has an attribute has a characteristic.
Precisely. Because we're defining the characteristics of a thing. So anything has a characteristic. We'll start with level because everyone knows what that is. Alright. This is a rough gauge of the character's survivability. It's used in things like Dungeons and Dragons, Rifts, a lot of more crunchy, RPGs that enjoy punching people to death. It reduces the number of values needed to be maintained by characters, and characters' increasing power as play progresses. I like this pattern a lot, because if anyone's ever played an RPG and gained a level that feels satisfying, so it can be considered also a type of reward. So it's that bonus there. Being able to know a character's survivability is useful for writing supplements. Like if you're writing like an adventure or something like that, it's nice to be able to gauge, can I put my, if I don't have to, if I see it's designed for 8 level characters, I can go, okay, not putting my level 1 group around here because they'll just get completely toasted. So it enables people to share adventures and share content and easily gauge it.
It's like a quick, universal way to look at something and say, okay, this is better than this.
Exactly. Another benefit is, like I said in point 2, it reduces the level of values that need to be maintained because a lot of things are based on level in some games. So you don't have to wonder too hard about how many skill points you're getting or whatever because it's determined by your level. Don't worry about what his skill points are. I'm just making a lot of assumptions, and I'm sorry if people don't know it. Alright, so that's what levels are. And examples would be the AD 3.5 uses levels in conjunction with classes. Characters gain levels as they gain experience points. Many character abilities are based on level. Skills are gained by a resource, are earned by gaining a level, and the basic game is limited to a level cap of 20.
So now would experience, would that be considered a currency or like a gauge?
It's a resource. It's a resource because currency is just the road for which information travels between gauges. I'm sorry that those two they sound very similar. Currency and resource, there are two things it sounds like two things you can spend. But if you have if you don't remember what a term is, I can help define it again. Don't feel it's an information overload, so don't worry too much if you forget something. Alright, so the reason why, I think one of the reasons why D&D 3.5 has a level cap is so that you can kind of add graduated, at different points in the game you can add, you know, what people get over to a course of time, and by limiting, you know, you have to have a limit eventually. A few games don't have any level restriction, but eventually you're going to run out of content. Eventually you're going to run out of content.
Well, the biggest challenge with 3.5 of the previous editions was that you actually got something every level.
Exactly.
So if you didn't put a cap of 20, who's going to determine what you did at the next level?
Not to mention due to the fact that it's a single die roll mechanism, eventually those bonuses are going to mean way more than a die.
Yes.
It's like, I have a plus 30, I have a 20. I don't even need to do anything.
Or for not one.
Like, nothing's variable at all. It completely changed the game completely. So it's important to note that with your game. I've already mentioned this one. Attributes. These are gauges with universal character aspects in the environment. They're specific named gauges with predetermined meaning and are defined by the game itself or players before play begins. They're the same for all characters of a given type, and the majority of RPGs use this pattern. Strength, again, I've been referencing that one. That's an attribute. Most things of a given type will have a strength, for instance, in most RPGs. You don't have to use that, it's just an example. Again, it's universal character aspects. It's something that is like innate. You can just say it's an innate quality. You can also define an attribute as ugliness. As the gauge gets higher, the uglier your character is. And that may affect other things. And that's an inherent property, and it's a characteristic that can be shared with common characters. A common character that may use that attribute would be characters like, Igor from like, yes, master. Alright, and then you also have like a completely different character, like a good character, which would also be ugly of Quasimodo. They would both have a rather high ugly meter. It'd be pretty high on the gauge of the attribute there. But this is an example of an attribute. Now, different games have different ways of generating these attributes as far as like the value for them. One way, very popular, random attributes. It provides a way to generate attributes randomly. Surprise. It's a specialization of the attribute pattern and gives this feeling of discovery of character. A lot of people like randomizing their characters because it feels like the character's already been there because it's out of your control and it's like there, right? And you can minimize the number of player decisions available because you just basically, and the dice tell you what's on it. It can be quicker than the alternative, which is point-based attribute generation. So the main benefit of randomly generating is if you want the feeling of the character has already existed in the world before you adopt it. It allows players to design the point spend attributes. They're a little different. It allows players to design their character abilities. So you're designing rather than discovering your character. It gives players flexibility in designing the characters and does not favor one player over another. It does not unduly extend character creation. It's really not that much faster to randomly generate than to spend some points once you understand how the system works. So it does not extend the process too long. But if you're going to make a game with a bunch of one-ofs, like, as opposed to a long game, you might want to implement a random choice. Another problem with randomization is that you might end up with stats better than your commons, which can be kind of annoying. Honestly, one's not any better than the other. Obviously, I'm showing a little bit of favoritism to point spend attributes, and I'm trying to. But there is a lot to say about point spend attribute because it doesn't favor one player over another.
You didn't mention you played good.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah, that's the key.
It is.
Point line.
Everything costs points. Everything.
With point spend, though, the problem that you have to end up balancing is that people will min-max.
Min-maxing is a problem. It is.
People will allocate their points.
That's where you determine a number of points that if they're going to max something out, it's going to,
Become.
Well, so there is something
Not
by
gonna
the
be
end.
by the very nature of the pattern, there will be specific builds that will be better than others. And you will end up with characters that are all the same if they're playing smart. So if this is something we need to avoid, we should keep that in mind if we want to keep because the back end, it's all in the back end. That's one thing you gotta keep in mind. It's all in the back end, and you don't really see this effect in gameplay. If you look at a character sheet and look at it, yes, this person has the exact same stats as this person. Iron Man, War Machine, almost the exact same character, but not the same. Same characteristics, not the same character at all. See what I'm saying? So there, but also, if you are trying to avoid that sort of thing where everybody is generating Iron Mans, whenever they try to make a specific character type, and you want a little bit more variability, then the way to do that is definitely by generating these things randomly. Just on a side note, derived attributes, so we talked about earlier. They're determined by a formula and typically use other attributes to generate a number. Take two gauges and either by table lookup or completely combining them, like adding them together or something like that, you come up to another value. But you do that by comparing the two gauges. Alright. Fudge allows game master to determine a set of attributes. It's important to note that not all games use attributes that are pre-defined. Some games like Fudge use attributes that are designed by the game master before the game is played. Words are used to describe an attribute's rating in Fudge. It's like it goes from fair, good, and great. And it's based upon the scale of the game. A game where the characters are snails, for example, all their speed is going to be fair because they're all snails. By comparison to us, they're slow, but if you compare snails, they're all fair. Now, for this, do we want to use randomly generated attributes? Do we want to use attributes at all? I generally wouldn't want to use attributes because it's pretty much the basis of most characteristics. Got one person saying 0.5.
I'm down with 0.5.
0.5. Don't feel ashamed that most people are going 0.5. If you honestly think randomization is fine, please voice it. Don't be ashamed.
Well, we could probably use a random aspect of it, like certain, like let's say you're born with some kind of deformity, that can be a random aspect of it. You can still put points in that as though you had trained a certain thing your entire life on.
There is a potential for using both patterns too. Yes.
The problem with doing randomization is we're living in the 21st century. I mean, we've learned a lot from
Exactly.
design, and unless you're doing something insanely imaginative, like bidding for it, like you do in Amber or Dogs in the Vineyard, for example, or you're using playing cards to generate your character like you do in Deadlands.
It's not going to separate. Don't include random generation just because you feel like you need to.
If you have a mechanism that plays into the...
If you're making a nostalgic kind of game that goes back into like old school D&D, by all means use the randomization one because that's totally, it gives you that feel. But, did you?
I was gonna say, I've seen a couple, professional done in homebrew, where they'll take it runs based off of point buy, but there's like, maybe a
There's a
D4,
random
D6, two, you've got your base pool, and then a small bit of randomization, so that
Small bit of
no two people have, will
Grossly
interact, so it's
different.
exactly the same thing.
And see, I like that idea too.
Okay, so.
Or some variation on that.
And
Because one minute, I wish I could remember the game system, there was point buy, but what you were buying was the die type that you were going to generate. I thought that was
Yeah.
very clever.
That is actually really
That is clever. So, would y'all like to use that system where you buy random stats of a different caliber?
So I think it's really cool. That's pretty cool.
I think it's pretty nifty. All right. General consensus. abilities improve as play progresses, and detailed descriptions details what it is that accomplishes. Now, this is where we need to decide. Are we going to be making a game, or are we going to be writing a lot of specific things in the rulebook? This is how this works, this is how this works, this is how this works, this is how this works. Which, that's perfectly fine, because, you know, a lot of, like I say, Pathfinder, D&D, all have well-documented abilities of how swim works, right? And that gives you a lot of unbiased, the rules handle it, and it's pre-negotiated by the players about how these rules work. Because you would say, okay, let's play D&D. Everyone knows how that works, and or they adopt a house rule into the rules, and then they like negotiate about it, and then those are the rules. Cool.
That'll keep people from trying to argue something
Exactly.
that's set out in the rules.
But this creates a lot more footwork for when you're actually coming up with these abilities.
And it's a question of how deep you're going to dive.
Precisely.
Is piloting, or is piloting?
The scale of conflict.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, you know, and
But you don't have to go too defined, but you do have to define how these abilities work. And the thing about skills is they further define each character about how good a swimmer or how good an athlete he is, or I don't know why I keep devolving into sports, but I keep doing it. It's physical stuff. But it tells you exactly what you can do with this and what you have to, it gives you an idea about how you can succeed in these. So, an example here. Risk has 125 skills. Each skill is based on a base skill rating, and the rating is based on difficulty plus 5% per level. Proficiency is not increased individually, and proficiency is increased as characters gain levels. Yeah, so as you can see, the skills basically increase as the character gains levels. Another use of the level design pattern, so you don't have to keep track of absolutely everything. So this is it's a characteristic that improves as gameplay progresses. So you don't have to continually increase things like attributes, which are high-level characteristics, which can affect a lot of things, as opposed to skills that which can be details and whatnot. Skill trees. So these are subsection of skills. Because allows you to customize characters' role, document abilities, improve as play progresses, and they expand available options as characters gain proficiency. Just like the skill pattern, except that you have to have a certain level of proficiency in a skill before you're able to move on and get these more specialized sets, skill sets that may be like super awesome. Like you have to go through arithmetic before you get to pre-calculus, before you can get to trigonometry. Differential equation things. Okay, so if you're like if you're a student RPG, I guess. An example is D&D 3.5's magic system. What? You might be asking, that's a skill system? Yes, it is. It uses a skill tree pattern because it limits the selection of spells as you gain levels. And the potency of the spells increases as the characters gain levels. The spell categories are dependent on the character's level. Now, you may not think of them as skills, but they certainly are because you have like, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for like wizard spells, right? So like, you can only get access to those as you gain levels. And so it increases as as gameplay progresses.
So it's anything that requires some kind of prerequisite would be considered a skill tree.
Anything that requires a prerequisite that also defines specifically, like what it does. And I just gave this example mainly because it's a normal one. You wouldn't think of it that way. So you don't always think in terms of like D&D skill sets.
So that would be some feats.
No, but that's because they don't actually improve as gameplay progresses.
Well, I meant more of like some feats that say, okay, you have to be like this level. You have to have
Those
this
have prerequisites, yes, but those are not skills because they do not improve. You have toughness, like a toughness feat gives you 3+ hit points. It doesn't improve. Now that did change in D&D 3.5 and 4.0 because toughness toughness, hey, we will not have any addition game in this room. We're not having that'll just evolve into an argument. But in D&D 4.0, they use the toughness feat actually improves as game play progresses. So it could be argued to be a skill. Now we're getting into weird stuff. Traits. These are flexible means to assign character abilities. It doesn't need to be predefined. They're generally made on a character-by-character basis. It has no well-defined way to show how traits relate with each other. You have to be careful about broadly defined traits. And you also have traits that have ranks with them. Ranks are basically levels of how good a trait is, as it can improve as it goes along. The difference between a trait and a skill, though, a ranked trait, for example, than a skill is that skills are written down in the book. This is how it happens. Traits aren't. Traits are defined by on a character basis. It can be like if you have a lizard character. There's no in this book there would not be anything on there that would say like a normally long tongue. You would not write it down. I mean, you would come up with that, and if you have a game master in your game, he would say, okay, that's fine, or not. And basically, the way that would work is, anytime having a normally long tongue would be beneficial. You could say, hey, I have a normally long tongue. And basically, these usually work very well with something we're going to be talking about later, negotiated contest. It's where you negotiate with your GM about a contest before the actual outcome is resolved. I'll go into that later. Just touching up on that real quick. Like I said before, you have to be careful about broadly defined traits. I'm going to make a trait that says, I'm a jack of all trades. That means I can use that trait for everything. You have to be careful about that. And when you design a game with this system, you need to keep that in mind and put in restrictions, perhaps using a resource to limit how many times they can use it. Yes?
And, with traits, a lot of times I think work best has been in stuff where the complete character generation is, say, point-based, where you can have that trait, but you're going to have to,
Yes, you spend more points for products that are more broad, whereas some more specific you could pay less for.
Or you could randomize traits.
Randomize traits. How would you randomize traits? I'm interested.
Well, I'm just saying, like, for example, I have a normally long tongue. If you're a lizard guy, you could roll on, like, some sort of table that is, like, lizard guy traits.
Well, that's the thing. That table is predefined. Therefore, it's not a trait. Anything that is predefined would not be a trait because traits. And this may be a completely alien concept to some people because most people play games that are, where everything's well defined. You come up with that as a character. I came up with loves chocolate.
So basically, a trait is a personal customization that allows you to further interact with the game mode you're creating.
Precisely.
For example, it's fluff that
has
actually interacts.
Exactly.
Okay.
Fluff that has game mechanics.
Means like you like characters instead of just
It does.
instead of generic.
It allows you more flexibility.
A good example of that, without getting into the lizard man's tongue anymore, is you'll see a lot of games where they'll say, list 2 hobbies or list 2 things.
That would be a trait, yes.
And if you put very serious about Sandlot, volleyball, there may come a point where you got to spike something,
Yeah, or like if you have it like a wood, and then you have like some sort of like spy sensory kind of thing when you go, hey, I'm really serious about Sandlots. And depending on the resolution and whatnot of the system, the GM might throw you a bone and go, here you go. I'm sorry, did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay, what's up?
I was wondering if traits could ever raise or enhance a skill.
Yes. Yes. In fact, that's generally what they do. It increases the ability. It doesn't really increase the ability so much of your character, so much as augments the situation. Like, like what I was talking about earlier, you have like a floating little sentry bot thingy like that. Probably you've already used a 20 system or something similar. Forward and try to do that, and I had, satellite experience in baseball. I would say, is this relevant, DM? DM would say yes, in which case you follow what the game rules say, which an example of one of the things you can do is give a modifier to like a +2, possibly to your roll, to a d20, in addition to all relevant modifiers, because you are specifically knowledgeable or specifically, geared towards that.
Okay, I'm thinking a little more, less sandbox, more like meditating as a trait for a monk class. And what I'm thinking is, would it be possible for him to say he meditates in a situation, okay, and the meditation doesn't work, and meditation is
So he's not relaxed.
right, but so like meditation is directly related to say his intuition, his level of intuition. If after 3 failed situational attempts, could he roll and it actually raise his intuition?
That would be subject to DM fight, which basically is, it means, I don't know, it all depends on what your DM wants. That's what it means to be truly flexible with your game rules. It's up to whatever it is that the GM decides whether or not that is a circumstance, how to handle it. It puts more work on the DM's shoulders, but it may be good for your for the game and whatnot. University of us.
The one danger to that, and I've had a DM for years that has gotten kind of bad about this, is the DM needs to keep track of the last time a situation similar to this came up, how did I resolve it? Because I guarantee you, your players will remember.
That is a problem.
Lack of consistency.
That's the benefit of using generalized contests as opposed to negotiated ones. Or, like I said before, we negotiate when that happens as opposed to pre-negotiating rules like with skills. We all know how skills work, in a specific game. We adopt those before we start playing. It can be fair to your players because everyone knows how they look. Whereas in that game, you may end up being a little unfair every once in a while, and that's the risk you gotta take with extra flexibility. That's one of the benefits, and it's conflicted, but it depends on what you want. Also, we forgot to define if we want to use skills or not. But okay, let's get that here. We pretty much understand the traits.
The crunchier your rules are, the less you're going to have that kind of thing. I mean, you're less
Precisely.
going to have
The more well-defined your game is as far as the pre-definitions, the less you're going to have arguments and bickering. How did this happen? How did that happen? But if you have a good game master, or if you have a game master that seems rather impartial, you can be like, okay, it treated it this way this one time, it didn't treat it, and then you treat it differently this other time. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll try to remember. It's one of those things. It's like it's a game. It may act a little bit different. We're talking up there to be part of the random facts of life. Now, do we want to use skills like predefined stuff, or do we want to use something more like that?
I say skills.
I think this is like good size.
Okay, so y'all would like to use predefined stuff, right?
Yep.
I gotta feel that that's what we're going to
I'd say one of the advantages of going with predefined is that if a particular group decides that the predefined stuff doesn't quite work,
You can create your own.
they can always go, let's stick this over here and we'll.
House rules are unnegotiated and the negotiations.
Well, and yeah, I mean, again, we're living in an age where we've got 4.0, we got Pathfinder, and first time I played D&D, you had 1 hit point.
Yep.
So.
I always love playing wizards with 1 hit point.
Yeah. So.
Love it.
Live
in a thrill.
I remember when they put
Priest
armor,
1.
I remember when they put armor in the game. Okay. There was a book called Chainmail, and I went, oh, I have armor for my head. So, back then everything was negotiated. Everything that wasn't roll the hit, you killed that guy because your weapon does 1 point of damage in the end.
So we're going to go ahead and think about our goals being more of a predefined RPG as opposed to ones that are
Freeform?
Well, freeform, yes, but you can also think of it as you can't account for every single thing. You can't. Eventually, you're going to have to negotiate something. Like, if you have like Wind in the Willows kind of RPG, and you have like a heroic frog and stuff like that, and he suspects that a squirrel with a mouthful like has a purse that he's looking for, right? One thing, well, in a generalized contest, how do you determine whether or not A, he has the purse in his mouth versus something else? B, how do you know if he wants to punch you in the stomach, for example, is he hit? Also stuff like that. But whether or not it's in his stomach, mouth or not, that's more like a, hey, that's negotiation, you know. Some generalized contests try to accomplish that, but it seems artificial. Like if you like, I mean, there's really no way of knowing unless you like have X-ray vision. But that is one of the things. Eventually, you're going to come up with something and have to negotiate anyway. But just go ahead and write that down. Now, where we're going to use skill trees, where we have like progression and skill sets, do you think that would be a good idea? If you don't have anything in particular in mind, we don't have to write it down, but we can keep that in mind. We both. Why not both? We could. And that's what I'm saying in addition to.
I think considering the nature of the story that we're trying
we have to keep in mind we're making a pseudo-realistic fantasy that's violent and gritty.
That skill trees might help to keep from getting the same kind of character. Somebody's got to
protects character niches.
Yeah, you start choosing a path that leads you to what type of violent person is going to kill the girl with a candy heart.
Well, that doesn't specifically grant character niche, because unless you specifically add extra rules for that. Skill trees don't specifically do that because if any character can grab like a psychopath skill and then go on a rampage or whatever.
But usually with trees, you'll have people tend, whatever their character's concept is, they'll focus the skills towards that.
Right.
It forces design decisions when you create your character, which is always fun.
So then what can we do to protect character niches?
That comes later. That goes with the class pattern, because classes are basically a template that you implement. But we're going to go ahead and go over all the characteristics before we go into the part. Gifts. That's not gifts. There we go. These customized characters with abilities. It does not improve as play progresses, and the detailed description details what it accomplishes. It's like a switch that turns an ability on and off. You don't get better night vision, you have night vision. So that's what a gift is. A similar an example of one would be D&D 3.5's basic 109 feats, like Brew Potion, Dodge, and Quick Draw. In the case of Dodge, yes, you can dodge better, but the ability it grants does not get any better. So it's a set ability that doesn't change, that's well defined. It's also seen in races and classes section. The ability modifiers that are granted by race, to races would be an example of a gift. Granted, it's not specifically mentioned as a specific rule set aside. We'll get to that later, why that's a bad idea. It still does so. Any other low light vision, etc. Any racial modifiers or abilities? Gnome's got a lot of those.
Now, I don't know if you're going to get into this later.
Sure.
It seems a little deep for this conversation, but one of your challenges anytime you have any of these things is behind the names and all the dressing you put around it, there has to be balance between X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
A game system like GURPS, Hero, whatever, all the special effects were done away with. It's just this is a blast and this is an entangle, and you can do whatever special effects you want on them, so that they're a little easier to define balance between.
As far as balance is concerned, that's hard to get into in a 1 hour panel. I'm more or less just trying to help make this, this is for aim for people that are having this, decisions, problems, and that. As far as balancing and stuff like that is concerned, a lot of that's, you can get a lot of guesswork and light test. There really is not much substitution to that. You need great education to get educated in guesses, but ultimately it's mostly light test.
Yeah, I can't remember what system it was there at DragonCon several years ago. There was one that was, they were playtesting it literally the entire weekend. Different groups, they had the character creation all done up, but just to see how the mechanics actually function, they had X number of pre-generated characters, and every group it was just you didn't get to pick; it just kind of went randomly, and they were like, okay, let's see what we can do.
All right, Toby, what time is it?
I don't know, but I've got an hour's worth of footage in 6 minutes.
What time is it?
10:40.
10:40. Okay, I think my panel ends at 11 o'clock. I have lots to cover. Okay, flip the gauge. Engage that helps. Hey, I shouldn't actually have to stop exactly at 11, but I want y'all to get y'all right at least if y'all don't continue. Engage that helps. Sometimes it hinders others. Characters that exhibit self-destructive behavior. This is like design goals. We want characters to exhibit self-destructive behavior sometimes. If we want to use this. We also would like to emphasize character strengths that are also act as our weaknesses. And characters have to choose between short-term needs and long-term goals. An example would be My Life with Master. Anyone familiar with that game at all? You play as a little henchman, and basically you do your master's bidding. Your character's self-loathing attribute is a perfect example of this. Has anyone played, let's see here, Werewolf the Apocalypse? Okay, Gnosis is a conflicted gauge. Sometimes it helps you as it gets higher, sometimes it's absolutely horrible. So it's one of those things. If you want to,
What does it do?
Gnosis, it gives you your werewolf abilities, or it fuels them.
but it can make you kind of enraged and kind of like maybe it's too. In fact, because I think there's an end game where you basically like there's a bad thing because like way too high, you think you hear guys or something, or it becomes too bestial or something. Yeah.
That's the short form.
So you basically, yeah.
Become an NPC.
Okay. Can we think of any gauges that we would want to use in a game like this that would need to be conflicted? And if so, I mean, you can't it's not necessarily to come up with any moment, but you know, in a line of us.
Cardinal direction maybe implies evilness.
Ooh, that's neat. I like that. Like that a lot. Now, how would that be conflicted? Like, let's see.
Is it like a humanity thing? Like
It could be, yeah. Like vampire humanity. Exactly like that.
Dark and light side points in Star Wars.
Exactly.
Every version of Star Wars.
It helps you sometimes.
No, I like using the directions from Oz. You know, say you're from the west where that one
That could be
particular
like
village was.
yeah.
You might it might being from there might give you say more knowledge of since you lived under a witch, you have knowledge of magic and beasties thereof. But people find out that you're from there and they assume that you are some dark evil bastard.
Yeah, and I like the cardinal direction thing.
Love-
It's one of the.
It fits the plot.
You get a lot of
Exactly, everything references.
You
I
get a lot
love
of
the games
games
that fits the plot too.
You get a lot of games where they'll talk about say
Welcome.
3, 4 or more elements. But the thought of going with something direction based, I have never seen a game where that cropped up. They're using that as kind of the axis of powers in the world.
It's very similar to the alignment pattern where you kind of right now you're a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or something like that. But
from like the northeast.
yeah, you're like perhaps a northeasterly witch. I'm a little good, but I'm a little on the crazy side. Okay.
And that can trigger things like somebody who was from say where the two regions met may not necessarily be accepted in either one. A little too much of this for these guys.
It could also incorporate a lot of the mythos of the design here. Also, safety valve. Notice fate points on some systems, things like that. It's a resource that players can spend to alter fortune-based contest, fortune meaning random changes it. It gives players a little bit of veto power over game mechanics. It becomes part of the game's contest rules, and it has to be scarce. If you give your players too many, opportunities to veto everything, it could be fun. I mean, I'm not going to say all time. There's always exceptions to absolutely everything.
The ultimate solution to scarcity for the safety valve is Deadlands.
Yeah.
Deadlands, your experience points are also the safety valve. So you can level up or you can live.
Yep.
There is
It ties
nothing
in.
more joyful as a game master to hand a stack of poker chips over and go, those are your XP. And you take 8 points of damage to your head. That'll kill you. But yeah, if you hand those back, that'll take away 6 points of that. So,
It makes incredible design choices. So if the resource you're using is, like you said, very valuable, then yeah, really good solution. We don't have to include this. Again, this is just another optional rule.
It's like Pathfinder has the hero points.
Hero points, yes. Heart also has fate points. The roll can be made more potent. Injuries can be reduced. Characters can start with 3, and they're purchased with the same resource to use to advance abilities. Very similar. Okay.
Shadow.
Exactly.
With karma.
But it's also usually if you need a safety valve, that's usually is like it's like it sounds like it almost seems more like a patch for a problem. It can be fun though.
With the old Marvel system, being able to spend karma to nudge things. It's like, if you're a good guy, you've done lots of little, every so often the universe just kind of goes, why not?
If we were to use this, how could we tie this into the type of game this is?
Favor with
Keeping in mind if we were a character, like an outsider or whatever.
Well, these are more metagaming stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you could, like, for example, in the game that I'm running, I have the players at the end vote on, like, whoever did.
That would be how you would game. Yes. A certain type of rewards.
And then in game, they can use it to like re-roll something, or if their character dies, they can spend like 2 or 3 to not die.
Goodness, this panel's going a lot longer than I was anticipating. I'm sorry, guys.
That's a good sign.
Since we were talking about the cardinal directions, I like what
Yeah.
he just said.
Brilliant. What's your name?
John.
Don't mean to put you on the spot there. John? I'm going to put a little note on there.
You get a gold star.
Yeah. That was an ancient.
But the other old guy in the room said, I did call him, said the favor of the witches. Could
But
be
using the Oz thing,
Yeah.
it may be that, say you're from the north, it's
Which is favor.
the good witch of the north, kind of watching over you and sees that
They are pretty much omniscient.
you're working, you're trying to do the right thing, but something bad's happening until she kind of does a little bit of her,
And I'll go one further, going back to the cardinal direction thing. If we're moving on the gauge,
You lose favor with her.
yeah, well, you stay in the middle, nobody's pissed off at you.
But you're also, but you're not going favor.
Nobody's giving you any favor.
Exactly. I like that.
and it's like the closer you are to, like say, and using somebody from the north, the further to the north they are, the more the witch of the north could interfere.
It's kind of like
And the more animosity you get from the witches side.
It's kind of like with D&D and Pathfinder and stuff, where you've got like deities, and if you, I guess if you follow that creed, then you can get some kind of bonus.
And the thing is, in something like this, you could even set it as kind of a limiter, though, the witch is quite possibly more likely to help you out if you're not the kind of person who goes asking for help.
It could also help, that system could also help determine the types of favors you're able to call upon. Like the Wicked Witch from the West could be like, fire my pretty! Whereas the Witch of the South, right? Like West.
Yeah.
West. North will probably be able to help you with more insight or something along those lines.
I'm just going to tell you that Wizard of Oz is public domain, and when he makes
It is!
when he makes $1 billion off
No. I'm going to show you guys this. Disclaimer, this is not going to be for me at all. And
There are a few of us in the room who know where he lives.
precisely.
Right now.
So yes, it is public domain. That's another benefit to the idea, is that it is public domain now. And it's also something that hasn't been addressed in a long time.
I actually don't think I've really seen an actual RPG pulling off of that.
It needs
What
to
a
be
creative
done.
idea does.
Yeah, I think we,
Yeah,
I'll be here most of the con. We can continue working on this. It's really cool. I wasn't expecting this much of a reception. Thank you all for coming.
I've got the entire
Really
list of
appreciate
potential
it.
playtesters.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's go into character health patterns. No, this is not the end of the panel. There's a lot more. I do apologize. We can break this up if we need to. Let's go with what everyone already knows as hit points. It's a resource to gauge when a character is incapacitated or dies. It has an unrealistically sudden loss in effectiveness from a character. It's a simple way to track how close the characters are to death, and characters are as effective when damaged as when not. The old expression, I got more than 1 hit point, more than 0 hit points, I'm fine.
The guy going, like my butt.
That may not necessarily be a bad thing. Let's look at our first design goal. Pseudo-realistic.
it's less fun.
Exactly. So we could definitely include a unrealistic pattern like the hit points. And if we want to make it pseudo-realistic, we can mix that with another pattern. Yes?
I was gonna say, rifts. You've got your hit points, which that's the, if your hit points get suddenly dropped, that's like these classic sword through the gut. And then you've got what in most cases is SDC structural damage it has, which is basically that's just a scratch.
That's the one problem I have with rifts, that they're actually for like long shit. Oh my goodness.
But it gives a nice balance.
It does. Yes.
Hero, which had 2,
Mhm.
you got body, then you got stun. You're stunned out, you're unconscious, but you're okay. You can still, you can be bleeding to death and still keep fighting because your stun is above 0. So,
But I think with this sort of game, we should gear the rules to be more simple than that. But as far as that, I like the direction, and you're basically talking about using what's called a trauma gauge, which I'm going to get into in just a second. Hey, welcome to the panel. Let me draw attention to you. Awesome. Just kidding. This is a very informal panel. We're creating an RPG at the moment. Did you want to be caught up on what's going on?
Catch us up.
Catch
Yeah,
us up.
what was it, Wizard of Oz?
We're basically, right now, our design patterns, which is basically our, if anyone needs to stand up, feel free. Don't worry about it. Okay, so after this, after we get to these patterns one, I will take a break. But basically, we're talking about pseudo-realistic fantasy, kind of violent and gritty. You should think like Wizard of Oz feel.
Books.
Kind of. It kind
Skyrim
of
meets Wizard of Oz.
Skyrim meets Wizard of Oz. RPG. That's all you really need to know at the moment, and we'll catch you up after when we get in the break if you want to.
Sure, I'm not gonna be here for a long, I've got a week.
Sure.
I was just gonna step in here.
Yeah, man. No
It's
problem.
cooler in here than out there.
Yes,
Air
it is.
conditioning is awesome.
Oddly, because I continue to speak and I have a lot of hot air. Okay, hit points are, for example, in D&D 3.5's hit points. Just to show you how they work, as you already know. They're determined randomly. They're gained whenever a character level is gained, so they're tied in with the character level. The amount of gain is based on your class that you select. Damage depletes this resource. Damage is calculated by dice rolls, and you add adjustments. It's usually regained with magic arrest. Those are some of the things you need to address when you use this. How are they regained? How is it depleted? How is it aka damage? It's one of those things. It's like, I think you consider. Trauma gauge, getting right into it, from what you were talking about. It's a gauge for harmful effects on characters, hinders the use of related abilities and attributes, it simulates effects of injury, it makes it a little harder to figure out what's going on in the middle of combat, because for everything you do, you pretty much, it's like, okay, my my trauma gauge says this, so that I'm again -2 or whatever. Like in White Wolf's system, when you take wounds and whatnot, you progressively get more penalties as you're wounded. So it must be considered for every character actually. It can result in a death spiral effect. If you are not familiar with this term, it refers to the fact that as you get closer to death, it becomes easier to die. That may be a problem, and that usually does result in a lot of games using like a safety valve. But we've already established we kind of like that pattern. So that may not be a problem.
It'll also kind of promote the use of a healer.
If we were to use that sort of dynamic. So there is that. And again, the example I was using is White Wolf the Apocalypse's health level system. I won't get into that too much, we're running a little low on time. Then we have wound traits. This maintains injuries as separate traits and increases combat detail and story potential and requires more bookkeeping to record different traits. It works best when wounding effects occur infrequently. So if we're making a game that's like the entire time, it's going to be like, and you're going to have so many wounds on your character, and your character will probably have no reason to be dead, to have no reason to be living. Conversely, there was a design concept we were talking about earlier. What was your name again, sir? Then Robert. Robert mentioned that you'd be chopped up into like 1 million pieces and still go on.
Well, you'd still be alive.
Yeah, you would still be alive.
You'd just be
Potentially.
You wouldn't be able to do anything.
So in a game system that has that possibility, a wound trait that says chopped to bits would be possible, while the character would not necessarily be dead if they are a certain type of character that could get to that.
Well, you're also talking about what, that doesn't.
Again, a trait is
it doesn't
a
change your
undefined.
mechanism, because I mean, chop to bits is, or set on fire, or.
We could define these things too. Another thing is, remember, traits are not defined. They're not predefined. They're defined when you get, like, if you're getting hit, like someone describes a sword swing like this, you'd have a gash on your neck or whatever. Now, a gash on the neck would be written on your character sheet at that moment. It would not be something you would reference into a character, create like a table or anything. It would come up on the spot. So that may not be fitting with our design goals with the current.
No, but if you're looking at using a hit system, and we were talking about using the simplest thing, and we're talking about death being more or less an abstract in this case.
Yes.
Because you've got a witch that can be melted by water, you've got a munchkin that got his axe enchanted and lopped off all his limbs and eventually became a tin man. You've got a scarecrow that can be, instantly consumed by fire. So the death state.
But a scarecrow that actually exists, and you may not be affected by certain things. Yeah.
So your death state may be more what's in question here than how you arrive at it.
Also keep in mind, death states are optional in RPGs. You may not have to until what's called an endgame. I could get into this later, but I feel it needs to be addressed at the moment. You can have it to where your characters don't die. They can't die. Things can happen to them. They can be limited, but they can't die. Conversely, they can't make a lasting effect on what's going on in their system, in their environment either, until what's called the end game. And the end game would be the threshold at which all bets are off. Your character can die. You can start making active change to a system.
Let's look at, for those who are familiar with paranoia, you have X number of clones. When you die,
Yes.
a new clone is launched. It knows everything that happened right up to that point. 2, when you run out of clones, game over.
Number 2, Steve Jackson Games did a cartoon.
I like how knowledgeable you are on RPGs.
I'm just old as hell.
That's a good attribute.
But Steve Jackson Games did a game called Toon, like a cartoon.
You played a cartoon.
Yeah, you didn't take hit points.
You flip a coin. I remember that.
You took bonk. And when you reached 0 hit points, you had to go stand in another room for 3 minutes.
Unless you did something clever and interesting that made everybody laugh and enjoy themselves, and you had to come back, or you never had to leave.
Or you didn't have to leave.
But that would be
It was all about cartoons.
But at the end of that 3 minutes,
we're about to leave.
We're about to leave.
at the end of that 3 minutes, you were reset full
Yes.
hit points back to the table because
That's brilliant. I like that.
you're trying to simulate what you see in cartoons. And if you, now that I've said that, every time you watch a cartoon,
It was sent to his
you're
room.
going to sit there and go, he's got to sit down for 3 minutes. And you're going to count it out. You're going to go, he had to sit down. It was good. Now he looks better.
Well, for example, wound traits. Riddle of Steel has many ways of simulating injury. Anyone familiar with that game? Okay. It's very, very visceral. So you have like a pain attribute which is subtracted from dice rolls. Shock reduces combat effectiveness but does not linger. Blood loss drains health and it can kill a character. Wounds is an injury to a specific location. This is the part where the wounds is actually the wound trait. The rest of those aren't. The rest of those are just attributes that affect gameplay. So if we want something that can make more, visceral combat, we don't necessarily have to follow this rule. We can make attributes that follow it. Wounds effects can range from a Charlie horse to death, destruction of cerebellum, really messy. So those are all the character health patterns, and we're going back to the characteristics now. Did any of those stick out the health patterns that we wanted to use?
I think having a hit point system with this style.
A hit point system would be useful because it does end realistically.
I honestly, I do, I do think the trauma gauge would be, because,
Something to keep in mind though, because we had to, if we want to be able to use both of those, because we're picking HP specifically because it's unrealistic. How do we maintain the unrealistic aspect while also increasing the realism?
Well,
They're conflicting.
there comes your death state, is what happens when the character dies.
Yes.
Does that prevent you from taking action?
So yes, they could do that. So the
A lot of
state
people
will fix that.
specifically say that.
Well, a good example, Wizard of Oz in film, or the book, either one. Scarecrow gets pulled apart. The only thing he can do until they put him back together again is complain about the fact that he got pulled apart. Right? The witch's death, a little more permanent, maybe.
Okay. One more thing I just thought of. If we're going to use a generalized rule set for this, we would, and if we would allow for something like the Scarecrow to be pulled apart and be fine, we would also have to consider outsiders like Dorothy. She wouldn't be, surely if she was torn apart, she would. So we probably would have two different, and if we were to do that, we would have to focus on two different types of game mechanics.
Now that's going to come into character creation is who are your characters? Are they the everyman that enters into this strange world and we're the passenger in that, or are they natives to the world, or can you do both?
Well,
And if you do both, then you've got two different sets of.
The problem with that, I think, would be that you'd have two sets of rules, and that not only can make it's like playing World Darkness systems together. You can do it, but power level of certain things are very different, and that may put a shift. Like, I'm never going to play Dorothy because what you do, you put like a little bit of water on a witch on accident. Hey, what's that?
But what if you started as outsiders and with every level, you
Progressively become
became
more like-
acclimated to your new world?
Oh, that would be
you kind of have it. Yeah, exactly. You can
like the world affects you somehow.
And your original death state is you wake up back in Kansas, wherever.
Ooh.
Yeah, like if you die at level 1, you're dead.
But as you become acclimated to one of these cardinal directions,
Okay, so everyone's an outsider in this RPG. That would be probably be the best way to do it. Because at least if you start as an outsider, you can at least, and should we use a level pattern, which I think we are using, if you at a certain level you would be able to, of gameplay, you would be able to select a character.
well, and on top of that, one of the toughest things to do in any fantasy world is to get your players to know what the hell the fantasy world is about.
Yeah.
Because they've got to read.
But if they're outsiders,
If they're an outsider, they're learning the world in a monolith hero's journey sort of way. You're crossing over that threshold, and you're learning the world as the game master presents to you. You don't have to walk in knowing anything about the environment.